Paul Giovanni Wickson, painting in Paris. Paul Wickson, 1859 to 1922. When Paul Wickson arrived in Paris, Ontario in 1884, he had two important things on his mind: his new wife, Elizabeth Hamilton, daughter of a Paris industrialist, and establishing himself as an artist. Born in Toronto in 1859, Paul demonstrated a talent in art that his mother recognized and encouraged. She enrolled him in the South Kensington School of Art in London, England. As a student in South Kensington, Paul created portraits, landscapes, and seascapes using oils, pastels, and watercolors. An important part of art education at South Kensington was life drawing, learning to understand the anatomy of human figures in order to recreate them in two dimensions. Younger students worked from sculptures. Paul Wickson learned to draw entire figures, as well as portions of figures, finding the unique personality of each. Older or married students at the Academy were able to work from life models. By the time he graduated, Paul had decided that the medium he felt most comfortable with was oil paints. His diligence as an art student earned him a top prize for his oil painting. It was while he was studying in England that he met his future wife, Elizabeth Hamilton, who was visiting relatives. Once graduated and married, Paul and Elizabeth settled in Paris, in a cobblestone house on Grand River Street, which they renamed Hamilton Place. As Paul was working to develop his personal artistic style, he found he was drawn to Canadian agricultural life, including the animals that played such a large role at that time. He spent time visiting farms and stables, studying animal anatomy, particularly that of horses. In an article of the Weekly Horse World of April 24, 1891, Paul explained, "If I'm to paint the portrait of a horse, I make it my business to get well acquainted with his individualities. After becoming acquainted with the horse, I then commence the portrait, and it is right at this time that a knowledge of anatomy is absolutely indispensable." He applied human life drawing techniques to animals, noting, "In the art schools of England, one of our studies was to draw the figure from life, then draw the outline of the same subject and fill in the positions of the bones and muscles. For the short time that it takes to do this, and for the value of study, I always try to do this with my animal subjects." Wickson applied a well-tried and accomplished technique to his art, with success. Paul Wickson did not limit his interest to portraits of animals, but explored other subjects as well. In 1883, he painted Jacob Henry Aarons at work in his pottery studio located on the banks of the Nith River. Wickson's painting is one of the few images of the studio to exist, as Aarons' pottery was destroyed by flood in August of 1883. Paul actively contributed to Canadian magazine publications. He submitted work to calendar illustrations. In 1912, Wickson illustrated a book by F. Douglas Reville entitled A Rebellion, concerning the Red River Rebellion. A great tribute to his success was the use of his painting, The First Furrow, on the back of the $5 bill of the Northern Bank, based in Manitoba. Wickson did not exist solely within the confines of his art. He and Elizabeth had two children, Lillian in 1885 and Norman in 1889. Paul was also an involved citizen of Paris. In 1904, he was appointed to the Paris Public Library Board as their secretary-treasurer. Paul also became an expert gardener and turned to gardening when he desired an escape from the activity of the family home, Hamilton Place. The Wickson family took part in activities in the town as well. Elizabeth and daughter Lillian were active golfers, and Lillian is in the middle of this photo of the tennis club in 1901. Paul and Norman also participated in sports. Life at Hamilton Place had become more quiet by 1919, following the First World War, when Paul's son Norman married Dorothy Wilkinson. Paul continued to paint and work in his garden, but was unwell. In the summer of 1922, Norman and his wife Dorothy moved into Hamilton Place. Paul became more quiet and withdrawn over time. The end for Paul Wickson came in a dignified manner. Mrs. Norman Wickson related, "On September the 2nd, 1922, after he had finished a painting, Mr. Wickson went for a walk in the garden. This was to be his last look at his much-beloved garden, for when Lillian called him to supper, she received no answer. She immediately notified Norman, and upon searching for his father, found him dead in the garden." Paul Giovanni Wickson was buried at the Paris Cemetery in the Hamilton family plot. 2 world wars, the Depression, new technologies, and the passing of time have greatly changed Paris since Paul Wickson first moved here. His paintings remind us of people, animals, and a way of life that existed 140 years ago.